announcement by Richard Trumka, head of the AFL-CIO. He's quoted as saying, "We have irreconcilable differences with every employer we deal with, yet we deal with them. Unlike Brother Fletcher then, President Trumka believes we can work together." Jerry?
Sean King, a Black Lives Matter activist, has been literally the target of police threats. On a Facebook group for California law enforcement officers, they openly plotting to assassinate him, saying things like, "Toss this guy from a helicopter, need a sniper," and the comments don't end there. Sean King needs to be put down. My friend says, who's a retired police officer, what it means to be a cop with more liberal viewpoint in his own share of death threats, because to other cops, he's a traitor. This isn't the labor movement that we know, but then again, we don't have a gun and a badge and a state sanctioned with the right to kill. Don't get any of it, don't get us wrong. Our friend is the only good cop, isn't the only good cop out there, but the system needs changing.
There are two kinds of union, and they're grassroots and top down. We've seen attempts to push the one member, one vote concept. Proponents of what's called the New Directions movement claim that they're advocating for a form of grassroots leadership. Well, I've read about what the New Directions movement had in mind. It's about making the union more democratic, small d. Jerry Tucker was the face of that movement within the UAW. He said, "Don't let the bastards provoke you into striking. Stay inside. Learn to run the plant backwards. Trust the knowledge and ingenuity of the rank and file to figure out how to make the plant ungovernable while mobilizing new forces and new allies to support you at the bargaining table." He understood how racism, sexism, homophobia, and anti-immigrant prejudice divides the working class against itself. He fought successfully against an attempt to turn Missouri into a right-to-work state. Please pay attention to this. If you get nothing else from these 3 days, here it is. He built a coalition with farmers and small businesses and framed the issue as Main Street against Wall Street, against big business. He found common ground and designed his message accordingly. Jerry believed in the intelligence of the people at the bottom, the base. He said, "I have an uncompromising faith in the rank and file's capacity to respond when the truth is shared, and a two-way flow of strategic and tactical options is offered the base." He also advocated to have every single member, not convention delegates, elect union leaders, which of course would make them more accountable to the rank and file. So let's take this opportunity before we get to our interview at 6 o'clock to dip into our suggestion box. What we've come up with here is suggestion number 1. Build relationships and remember, they work both ways. If you want folks to turn out and support us, our efforts, we have to be there for them. Suggestion from the box.
Talk to the media. Unless you're positive a particular TV network is anti-worker, treat a media interview as a teachable moment, because unfortunately it probably is. And with union membership down to around 9% of the workforce, we need to get our messages out there. Get to know your media, invite them to the local events in your community, betterment projects.
Thank you, Terry. Here's some demographics about what's going on in the union movement. We used to be as high as 38% in the nation right after World War II, and it's dropped until last year was the lowest we'd ever got as far as percentage of folks in the working class who are union. That's down to about 10.5%. So we've got our work cut out for us. In 1964, the Midwest was full of manufacturing jobs and had the highest concentration of union workers in America. that has changed drastically, both because the share of jobs in manufacturing had fallen and also because fewer of the manufacturing jobs that remain are held by union workers. New York has the highest share of union workers in the country. The main story here is the public sector. 71% of government workers in New York State belong to unions. Nationwide, 36% of government employees are in unions, compared to just 7% of workers in the private sector. Surprisingly, Alaska and Hawaii have the second and third highest rates of union membership. In Hawaii, union membership is particularly strong among hospitality workers. In Alaska, it's strong in infrastructure like road building. Also, government jobs make up a bigger share of the job market in these two states. Unions have never been really a thing in the South. Even in the 60s, the share of union workers was still only about half of that in the Northeast, Midwest, and West. This is partly cultural. People here have long been less supportive of unions than people in the other parts of the country. And in several southern states, collective bargaining for key public sector employees is prohibited by law. The demographics for union members show that participation for males is slightly higher than for females, but only by a percentage point. Black workers have the highest union membership rate, right by white workers following close second, followed by Asian and then Hispanics. As for an age group, workers between the ages of 45 to 64 have the highest number of union members. The percentage of workers belonging to a union, which is called density in the United States, peaked in 1954 at almost 35%. And the total number of union members peaked in 1979 at an estimated 21 million. And we've seen those numbers drop precipitously. Do we have another suggestion from the suggestion box?
Yeah, and this one actually comes close to heart for me. Excuse me. Make sure you get your family involved and actually take them to the union. Let your kids ask questions. Let them visit the union hall with you. Go to events. My daughter, when she was in high school, she had to write a letter for a scholarship. And she actually came up with a very good statement. She said that the union is the heart of America, because I was a single parent, and with my union job, I was able to support her on my own without getting any child support from my husband, my ex-husband, and keep her in all of the activities that she needed to do. She kept benefits, everything. And that's where I got my retirement from. I worked for AT&T for 36 years and was involved in the union, as you know, and then I retired. So it's really important that you actually bring your family down there and get them involved. Bring them to the gatherings, bring them to parties, the picnics, and get to know your fellow union members, because they become your brothers and sisters.
Okay, here's another one. Remember our roots. We must fight as hard for our rights as the company does theirs. Let's bring back FDR's Blue Eagle, a business with a good relationship with their employees' unions were allowed to display the Blue Eagle in their place of business and encourage people to shop there. Well, we've got quite a long time here before our next interview, so how about another suggestion?
Okay, another suggestion is that if you do happen to be part of a union and you go on strike, please don't do anything illegal, don't be violent, don't destroy things. The last thing in the world that you really want to do is in a union strike or a protest, you don't want to be destroying company property, because you know what? That gives all union members a bad name. The union is meant to protect us from the companies. However, if we are out there doing things destructive, it kind of makes it where it's a very difficult ground to walk on.
Well, here's another good one. Talk union out in the open. If a grocery clerk's union is in negotiations, talk it up at the checkout line. Let them know you're union too, and you'll have their back if they walk. Then, if they do walk, bring them a case of water to the picket line and spend 15 minutes walking with them. Take the kids. Same with teachers, firefighters, the election company. They enjoy the extra company, and they see that there is actual support out there from the public. Another suggestion, encourage union people to run for office and then back them all the way. Actively seek out these folks because they will always be on your side. You have another one there?
Also, as far as when you are voting for contracts, please do not ever agree to a 2-year contract. Back in 1989, we had a very long strike. We were actually Pacific Telephone back then, and we had a very long strike that lasted, I believe, 2 or 3 weeks because our union was holding out to protect the retirees. Retirees are just as important as you are because one day you'll be a retiree and you would definitely want to keep your benefits and keep your pensions and protect your rights as an employee or a past employee.
Here's a suggestion that may end up getting a little bit of flack. It says, get rid of the nepotism in the union and blocking the people of color. Not all unions do this, but some are guilty. They're saving their jobs for their children and their grandchildren, and they're not allowing others to move in. I can understand wanting to carry on a dynasty or a tradition within your family and continue with that line of work, but you're not opening it up to fresh ideas and fresh opportunities for people that would otherwise have not seen this kind of opportunity. You have another one for us?
How about to go on a listening tour? Don't defend your position. Sit, listen, take notes. You're going to learn something. Without talking to the people who are members of the union or without talking to people in the workplace, you will never find out nor understand what is important to them.
Here's one that will strike fear in the hearts of all of us. Get rid of unions. They're no longer needed in this day and age. I think we all know better than that, especially with the person that was in the White House fighting to get rid of all the regulations and safety rules that we have on the workplace. And we need to make sure that we keep those, and if they're gone, then we need to bring them back. I have a feeling that this person in the White House has set us back about 2 or 3 decades, and we're going to have a lot of traction to get back to where we were before he was elected. Another one that's near and dear to me is win hearts and minds both internally and externally. As Terry said, part of building relationships is education. Tell your coworkers, your neighbors, your relatives, your congregation what it means to be union. Remind them that the fight is not just about you, it's about the community. Package your message in easy to understand bits. Make it easy for folks to tell their coworkers, etc., what you're all about, and to spread your message. Another one for us?
Also, yeah, try to encourage lower level managers to join the union because, you know, lower level managers don't even have the right to hire or fire people anymore. That's always done by the upper management, second levels, maybe even third levels and above. And it makes it where your first level manager becomes the bad guy. Well, you think they're the bad guy, and they're truly not. They're just following what they're being told, and it's basically a dictatorship. The company's telling them, you have to do this, because if you don't do this, you're not going to have a job. So encourage them to actually get into the union themselves.
That's a good one. Here's one that just came in. Create a speakers bureau. Send those polished leaders out to their local high schools, colleges, Kiwanis, and talk about union. If you're talking to your local historical society, tell them about Walter Reuther and the fight for civil rights, about the Ludlow Massacre, where miners and their families lost their lives in Colorado. And a women's group, tell them about Eleanor Roosevelt and our first Secretary of Labor, Frances Perkins. So all these you can tie in to messages about union history and about unionism, and bring up in conversation, and let people know that their next door neighbor is probably a union person. Their kids' teacher is probably a union person. Their electricians probably a union person. We're all over the place, but we need to engage the next generation. You have another suggestion?
Okay, here's one. Don't be a puppet of Democrats. They're after my guns. This isn't true. They're just sore losers. Don't fall into that, because you know what? Not all union members are Democrats, and not all Democrats are after your guns. I mean, you know, there's a fine line there. So we're definitely not into assault weapons, and because those cause a lot of issues. However, you know, just don't fall into all these tricks and the lies that you get told.
Adopt a sister union in another state or country, or both. Invite them to virtually participate in a union meeting and hopefully get it better than we have so far. And keep an ongoing dialogue so you can find out what their wages are like there, what their working conditions are like, and maybe you can teach them a thing or two, and they can teach you a thing or two. And it's all about communication. The more communication we have, the better society we are, the better labor movement we are. You have another one?
Term limits for union officers. This is a really sticky one, because you know the international president of the UAW now faces mandatory retirement at the age of 65. So that means that if he gets voted into office, or she gets voted into office at the age of 30, they can literally stay in there for 35 years. And you know that's making it where there's no change coming in. And you need to have change in order to make things better, because new ideas, new people.
What about somebody who's 64 who's doing a great job? Do you think term limits works for them?
As long as they're listening to their members and they're bringing in the new ideas and new suggestions and thinking outside the box, then I think that things could be a little bit different. However, I believe that when someone stays in office for 20 to 30 years, and like you had stated, nepotism earlier, I think that, you know, there's a fine line there also.
Well, that can certainly create a lot of havoc if you don't know who to replace them with, for instance. But at Congress, so there's been a lot of talk recently of having term limit for Congress. So what do you folks think? You think that's a good idea? Here's another suggestion. Unions should be more militant. Sit-down strikes, occupy the building, general strikes, illegal stuff. And some corporations and some municipalities have broken their contracts with the middle class by reneging on their contracts. A lot of cases of unfunded or underfunded liability have come up, and in Wisconsin and other places, they've actually undermined the contracts that were bargained in good faith between the union and the state or the county, and have ended up costing people a lot of money, because all of a sudden there's no pension there, and that's not the American way, and it's not the way you're supposed to negotiate a contract. Do you have another one?
Are there any more in the box?
Let's see. How about this one? Get to know your elected officials.
That's a really important thing. Getting to know your elected officials, and attending even their fundraisers and their neighborhood council meeting, your neighborhood council meetings, and also the meetings of your congressman. It's very important to do. And it actually gives you a chance to voice your opinion to them, to let them know that the constituents are actually there listening to them and watching them and overseeing everything that they do. And it even gives you a chance that maybe in the future, if you're involved in the union, you can get involved in the political side of it and maybe even go lobby and try to fight for some of the rights that are important for working people.
Yeah, it's good to know your elected officials. They appreciate boots on the ground when they're running for office. And if you get them elected, they'll remember you, believe it or not. Money helps, sure, but they'll remember you more when you walked a precinct or two on their behalf. And then once they're elected, of course, you want to keep in contact. Visit them when they're home from Washington or the state capitol. And even if you don't have an issue, but need their support sometime in the future, thank them if they've helped you in the past. That's all very important because, again, communication is crucial to moving our agenda ahead. Let's see. The suggestion box is now empty. It's idea time. And we're asking you, what do you think unions should do or not do or change? Leave us some remarks in the chat on Facebook Live, and we'll get to those statements and questions.
Okay, well, guys, I'd like to introduce John Andrzejczyk. Like us, like most of us, he wants to see the union movement grow and thrive. And he has created labor lines, which according to the About section of the Facebook page, is intended to build solidarity among working people. And we'd like to have a lively discussion, good information, and organizing for active solidarity. We can't develop our power as a working class if we can't respectfully and passionately agree to disagree on some things. Building solidarity is what the site is all about. It's all about our work. Brothers and sisters, John Andrzejczyk is a member of the Laborers Union, and don't let the accent fool you. He lives here in North Central Idaho.
Hi, John.
Hey, folks. How
Hi,
you
John.
guys doing? Hi. Okay. I just got my papers organized here. Oh, that's okay. So that's okay. I'm ready to begin if you are.
Go right ahead.
Yeah, sorry for the
Okay.
delay. This was new to us. We've
That's
never
fine.
tried to link
That's fine,
Zoom
yeah.
to Facebook
No,
Live.
You know what they say about technology? It's great, except when it isn't. So I'll go ahead.
Not true.
Thank you both, Dan and Terry, for inviting me to this program. I'm honored and flattered. And again, 65 with a work history in natural resources as a logger, firefighter. I've been employed in what we call the trades with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, IBEW, which I just retired from. And I still carry a card, as you said, Terry, with Laborers Local 238. And I have a bachelor's degree in business and an associate degree in forestry. What has labor done right and wrong? Excuse me, I'll take care of that. What has labor done right and wrong? I'll be going back and forth on that. I'll start with what labor has done right. Labor is still here, while those who predicted our demise have long gone. From Bob LaVenture, who until his tragic death last November was the United Steelworkers District 12 director. According to the United States Department of Labor Bureau of Labor Statistics, work stoppage data, workers involved in strikes and other actions against firms over 1,000 employees, 2019 had the largest number in this decade, measured by employer, 25, with a total of 425,000 workers. In 2018, we had actually more workers, 485,000, and the majority, of those workers were in fields dominated by women, education and healthcare. One needs to go back to 1983 to find a bigger number, 900,000. For some comparison, in the United States population, 83 was 234 million, while we're at about 300 million plus today. but with the union density of 20% back then and 10% now. Again, since 83, one cannot find 2 consecutive years with a total equal to 2018, 2019 of 1.1 million workers engaged in what the BLS calls work stoppages, which is mostly strikes. In 2019, along with these strikes, there were significant collective bargaining agreements achieved without strikes from the United Food and Commercial Workers 555 in Western Oregon and Southwest Washington historic contract for its 8,000 members, dealing not only with wages and healthcare benefits, but with workplace stability, and to the National Union of Healthcare Workers 85,000 member settlement with Kaiser Permanente, which I would imagine you folks in California are pretty familiar with.
Oh, yeah.
So labor continues to exist. What has labor done right? Labor continues to exist. It's expanding in such employment fields as traditional internet journalism, I like to point out. I think we were caught flat-footed on our response to neoliberalism. As defined by the handbook for neoliberalism, an extension of competitive markets into all areas of life. Economic, politics, and society, and I want to emphasize society. Neoliberalism was and is effectively an assault on civil society and the civic good. Starting in the 70s, during the Carter presidency, labor institutions have confronted a battlefield far different than not that many years ago of company thugs, militia, and the U.S. Army. Instead of strike breakers, labor and society now were challenged by deregulation, austerity, and privatization. So don't attack the Teamsters or the airline unions, deregulate their industries, as we did under legislation submitted by Democratic Senators Kennedy and Cannon and signed by Jimmy Carter. Don't attack public sector unions, privatize their work, from park district crews to schools. Cut spending in these union fields of employment through austerity politics and policies. Neoliberal trade policies and pacts de facto nationalized the backbone of private sector labor, our industrial industries, by exposing them to unfettered globalization, lacking any meaningful protection under labor and environmental protection, under any meaningful protection for labor and environment, While these facets of neoliberalism have the most direct impact on labor, its foundational principle of market fundamentalism was and is toxic to the sea that labor swims in. In the words of political theorist Wendy Brown, it's the economization of all features of life. The result is a society that promotes hyper-individualism, social Darwinism, producing a new class society, the precariat, as described by Ethelani and others, as millions of workers and their families in the United States alone, oppressed by the lack of economic stability, job security, material, and or psychological welfare. In the words of Cooper Caraway, a labor leader, we are told it is the gig economy, the side hustle economy, but the fact is it's the exploitation economy, and we're told to be proud of it. So starting decades ago, labor was pitched into a fight against a hydra foe across many fronts that undercut the labor's most core principle, solidarity. A force came forth that, in the words of Robert W. McKenzie, instead of citizens, it produces consumers. Instead of communities, it produces shopping malls. The net result is an atomized society of disengaged individuals who feel demoralized and socially powerless. But in defense of labor, I will say, what of our institutions have been able to respond to this adequately over time, be it the faith or the humanities or civil society in general? So now, organized labor, again, starting in the 70s, had two devils to battle in the form of our two political parties. The Republican Party, allied with the traditional anti-labor groups from the Chambers of Commerce and the think tanks inspired by the Powell Memo, and now the Democratic Party. While many, including myself, will criticize organized labor's relationship with the Democratic Party, I will state that this should be looked at in the historical context laid out in Philip Dray's book, There is Power in Union, where he quotes Nelson Lichtenstein. Labor unions have exerted a civilizing influence on politics, government policy, and corporate behavior, forcing beneficial changes like regular factory inspections and fire laws, and helped assimilate new arrivals to America. But early in our history, American workers learned something unfortunate about our country. It did not care much for labor unions. In no other nation has organized capital so resisted organized labor, perhaps because, according to Liechtenstein, in contrast to England and Europe, powerful American corporations developed before the emergence of strong centralized government or overt political class politics. Under our two-party system with no labor party, where our courts, again according to Dre, have proven to be unfavorably disposed towards idea of association of ordinary people standing up against corporate power. But I will say, in closing, on what labor gets wrong, what I believe labor will get wrong, if they now see our current president as the disease and not a symptom. What is labor doing right? Responding to neoliberalism. After 40 years, we have been seeing labor picking up the cudgel. In January 2019, the 30,000 members of the United Teachers Los Angeles, UTLA, under leadership of their president, 50-year-old Alex Caputo Pearl, and again, to all those folks in California, I'm sure you're very familiar with this, went on strike after a 2018 strike authorization vote of 98%. Pickets went up in front of 900 schools. Issues were pay, class size, inadequate staff support, lack of nurses and librarians, and charter schools. After 60 days, they got 6% wage increase, reduced class size, nurses 100% across the school district, librarian in every middle and high school, 30 community schools to be established, and a non-binding resolution calling on the state of California to establish a cap on charter schools. In my opinion, what the UTLA did right was not to be seen in their successful results, but the years of preparations ahead of it, and how they were going after some of the fundamentals of neoliberalism, austerity, and privatization. According to an article in a January issue of 2019 Los Angeles magazine by Hila Aron, Caputo Pearl, the president of the UTLA, led a faction of union members titled Union Power against the incumbent president back in 2016. In his campaign, he promised a far more aggressive stance against the spread of charter schools, standardized testing. The school district's president at the time, John Deasy, and they also argued that the union needed to build up the capacity to strike, one of the union's ultimate weapons, and looking to gain an 80% authorization vote, which they far surpassed for their 2019 strike of 98%. In 2016, already looking ahead to the next contract dispute, he promised in a speech, the next year and a half must be founded upon building our capacity to strike, our capacity to create a state crisis. In early 2018, there simply may be no other way to protect our health benefits and to shock, I love that term, to shock the system into investing in the civic institution. The civic institution, Dan and Terry, here we are once again going back to what neoliberalism attacked, civic institutions, to shock the system into investing into the civic institution, the most fundamental institution, in my opinion, perhaps, public education. In preparation, Caputo Pearl and his leadership organized 900 schools. You two folks have all this background in union organizing, 900 schools, in effect, 900 locals, right? Into chapters for teams, won 80 to 20% vote in dues increase, which they used to form organizational departments, a research department, and a parent community communication organization. The union trained, chapter teams on issue narrative to trigger expansion of strike. This is very important in my opinion, to trigger expansion of the strike into the community. To go back 7 years, the Chicago Teachers Union, CTU, 2012 strike under Karen Lewis, 29,000 members. Required by state law to make contract negotiation strike issues, they laid out, and appropriately, pay, medical benefits, and rehire protection. But according to Dan Moberg in the September 2012 In These Times article, at the heart, the strike was over the union's deep opposition to what it calls a corporate reform agenda, which is a direct result, in my opinion, of neoliberalism that pursues a competitive or punitive relationship with teachers rather than a collaborative one. After the end of the 7-day strike, Moberg goes on to say, teachers, students, and parents are the immediate winners, not because the contract was a sweeping victory or the fundamental problems of the Chicago public schools were solved, but because the contract limits the encroachment of corporate-style school reform. Such reform adopts a punitive attitude towards teachers rather than a collaborative one. He continues, Moberg continues in that article in 2012, the union came away stronger. Members were inspired by the strike, their rallies, and their strong public support. The support came especially from low-income African-American and Latino communities. Ultimately, the strike was a success and will serve as a model for the future, looking again to the 2019 LA strike. Going forward, the CTU 2019 strike. And now we're going to talk about bargaining for the common good. Again, from In These Times, October 2019 by Rebecca Burns. The 2019 strike by the Chicago Teachers Union, CTU, had on the table a package of housing demands. The union asked the Chicago public school system to provide housing assistance for new teachers, staff members to help students and families in danger of losing housing, and take other steps to advocate for more affordable housing overall in the city. And so my theme here, Terry and Dan, is that after decades, literally, of labor being caught flat-footed in response to this neoliberalism, we're starting to see labor unions and their leadership rising up to this challenge. Because again, as neoliberalism was a broad attack on the civic good, these strikes for the common good, are a broad push against it. And what is more broad of a popular front than the workplace? By raising an issue that affects not only teachers, but the communities that they live and work in, Burns continued, the CTO deployed a strategy, again, bargaining for the common good. In their article, Burns said the increased embrace of common good bargaining by teachers has in turn helped boost public support of unions nationwide, from 30% in 2015 to 43% in 2019. And actually, if you look at the figures of improvement or overall support of unions overall in the nation, we've seen a vast increase of this, especially by the younger people. In 2013, inspired by Chicago, the St. Paul Federation of Teachers, SPFT, worked with community allies to jointly draw a list of 29 demands. Reforms to school discipline procedures, the reduction of standardized testings. While the school district initially refused to negotiate over 18 of these areas, a united front by teachers and community members eventually pressured it to include language in almost every area that the St. Paul Federation of Teachers new contract. These victories helped give form to a formal network called Bargaining for the Common Good, which now includes some 50 unions and community organizations. The goal is to expand labor's scope of bargaining beyond wages and benefits to advance a broad working class agenda and go on the attack. I love that term, go on the attack against shared enemies, Wall Street and corporate America. 3 strikes at once. The Chicago 2019 strike is a good example of this bargaining for common good. School support staff and Chicago Parks District workers, represented by Service Employees International Union 73, also went out. While negotiating separately, the union pushed for a common narrative. The city had to commit more resources to vital public services and the workers that make them run. Again, a pushback against neoliberalism. Other key issues include adequate staffing of nurses, counselors, librarians, which many of the city schools lacked entirely, rolling back the privatization of school activities, creating enforceable sanctuary protections, and more.
Do you think, John, that all the successes you're reading about here seem to be in the public sector? Do you think we can do the same thing on the private side?
I think so. I do. Again, I don't think it's that hard of a narrative as people could imagine, because for one thing, the data's on our side, Dan, right? The decrease in union density has led to wage stagnation, wealth concentration, on and on. And so
Exactly.
I think the argument's there. I think it's very conclusive. I see your article back there, Capitalism Killed the Middle Class. Yeah, so unions can and must and are able to step up to this argument.
Very good. Yeah, I actually noticed that I'm doing research on my next book, which is Capitalism Taken to the Global Extreme. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at 4 countries. I'm looking at Norway, I'm looking at Morocco, Thailand, and France. And I'm looking at how many of them have had general strikes and revolts and things like that. And there's this report that's put out by the UN every year that's called the Human Development Index, and they look at several things like longevity, educational opportunities, things like that. And time after time, year after year, Norway comes out on top. And one of the things that I found interesting about Norway is they are 57% union.
We go back again. It's neoliberalism, and I picked it after thinking about your question. Neoliberalism is really an ideology. It's not economic policy. It's ideology. It's a commodification of humanity.
Right.
We're all just, again, as McCheesy said, it's, we become consumers. We're atomized. I mean, I won't say, I'm not going to judge people. We all love, I have a house full of consumer goods. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
But if that's how we're going to ultimately define ourselves, and it flies against, and neoliberalism flies against almost all teachings, not only by our most of our religious faiths, but all of the humanism teachings. I think that all we are, I think again of, and you're from California. You go back to the Berkeley free speech movement.
Oh yes.
Mario Savio, right?
Yep.
Cogs in the wheel.
Exactly.
Cogs in the wheel. That we just say enough is enough. I think unions have done right by simply surviving in the most hostile economy. The United States is obviously hostile of all Western countries, first world countries, to organized labor.
I'm afraid you're right. And the next generation, like you said, is giving me some hope because they're seeing that being a member of a union is a no-brainer, and they're willing to do what it takes to get involved. And I'm taking a lot of excitement out of watching them go for labor unions. The recent thing with the Uber drivers has indicated that there is a strong desire out there for that sort of activism, I guess you'd say.
Well, they want job protection.
Yeah, they realize that.
Right. Cooper Caraway. Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with him out of South Dakota. I interviewed him. I listened to him on AFL-CIO podcast before that called State of the Unions, and he put it so well. That's why I quoted him. And when he said they call it the gig economy, the side hustle economy, it's the exploitation economy. And when he said, and we're told to be proud of it, he's talking about his generation. He's a young man. They're told, they have this, they're supposed to brag about, I got this side gig, I got this, I that. But they all know when they go home, it's not going to work. Exactly. it's
You can't save for the future. You have no
no,
benefits, no sick pay,
and
all those kinds of things. As they get older, they realize what's missing in their lives in order for them to get ahead.
and however they come to it, Dan and Terry, and stop me when you need to, but however they come to it, the young people, through it's their faith, through it's their spiritual exploration, through its total humanism without any deity. I think we all realize that uh, humanity is a shared experience. You know,
That's a good way to put it.
It's a good way to.
yes,
Very good.
I see more solidarity expressed in many ways by younger people. That we're all in this together. I too I have enormous faith in the younger generation, and I think when we try to split the younger and the older generations, once again we're just getting played.
Exactly. Thank you for your time, John. Wanted to talk a little bit about your labor lines.
Okay.
I read that it's intended to build solidarity among all working people, and you want lively discussion, good information, and organizing for active solidarity. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Well, I started it because at first I thought of a clearinghouse for labor news, what's going on, because again, we saw this uptick in labor action. You know, going back to the statistics I quoted, 2017, only 35,000 workers participated in work stoppages. In 2018, we saw almost 500,000. In 2019, 400,000 plus. So I wanted a clearinghouse where we could share what's going on where. And it led from there. I have some great co-administrators, including my daughter, who's a 25-year-old fifth grade teacher and member of the Washington Education Association,
Very good.
and a comrade over in Montana, a comrade down in Arizona. So we have 3,000 members, mostly from the U.S., but all across the U.S. Everything from hardcore Leninists to staff members of established unions. I got a lot of help from United Steelworkers, Bob LaVenture, before he died. Now we do have members in Canada, and thanks to Bob, we have a fair amount of members in Mexico due to his work with the steel industry down there. It's open. You can join easily, and you can post easily. But Mark and I in particular, Mark Anderlich, co-administrator, and I, as we put it, we have to learn on Facebook, on social media, we have to learn to speak to each other.
Exactly.
Definitely.
It's easy to be, just shoot away, right?
Yep.
And yeah, but we're going to learn to speak to each other. So there's certainly, there's a lot of news now with COVID, a lot of news now under the responding to George Floyd and others. And I welcome all that, but it has to stay civil. And we've had a few dust ups. If I invite anyone to go on that, I was going to mention every morning we get a live stream from our SARCO strike. Anyone listening, our SARCO, it's going on October will be a year out. 7 unions outside of Tucson and Texas against our SARCO mining. And they live stream every day on our website. And if you're kind of an emotional guy like me, who wears it on his heart, brings tears to your eyes to see him standing out there.
I can understand that. What's the labor situation like where you are now in Idaho?
Well, excuse me, we're a right to work state. We are seeing some progress, and we have formed, I joined it after it was formed, we have now a labor caucus as part of the Idaho Democratic Party, which calls on supporting the formation of a classless society, which I find interesting. And I fully expect it, considering the leadership behind it, for it to become soon one of the most powerful voices in the Idaho Democratic Party. We had our strike in Mullen for 3 years, Mullen, Idaho, historic mining community. United Steelworkers 5114, 3 years. They settled in December of last year. I know it was controversial, but I was going to say after 3 years in an isolated mining town up in the middle of nowhere, that mine is still being run is still being worked by union miners. We
What are
see
they mining?
silver ore.
Ah, okay.
Yeah,
Right.
it's still, yeah.
Because I
Yeah,
know Hillary got into trouble a few years ago when she told miners in West Virginia that they should start looking for another line of work.
I know. I tell people to be enough skin off me like an onion that you'd find put into the pearl. And then, that kind of leads to the Green New Deal. I mean, the Green New Deal goes, labor has to be the route to our response to the climate catastrophe. If we don't get it, if it's not just transition, it's not going to work. Yeah, I've been around these folks all my working life. I grew up in Chicago back then in the day for Rahm Emanuel. With all its flaws, it was a tough union town, right?
Right.
Yeah, tough union town. My heroes were the construction workers. I worked downtown Chicago. I'd walk by and watch those skyscrapers going up. Yeah, Idaho's tough. We're seeing, right next door is Washington State, a real strong union town, really stepped up to the Janus decision, actually gained membership after the Janus decision.
Wow.
Had some great outcomes in the healthcare field as well as grocery stores. Local 555 out of Portland won a historic contract. So we've seen a lot of good news coming out of Washington State. Montana, next door, very interesting state. Once a stronghold of unions with Butte, which my local out of the IBW was in Butte, Montana, or what they call Butte, America. Strong union state, and will be interesting contest for governor. So Dan and Terry, it's a struggle all along, but again, I'm willing to be optimistic. You know what they say? It doesn't cost you anymore.
No, it
That's true.
doesn't.
Yeah.
And
Well,
you
thank you
folks
for
got
your
all
time.
those, all those decades behind you. I truly respect that.
Yeah, I think we've got our work cut out for us anyway. And
Yes,
one of the things I really want to do with this is create a legacy for the next generation, so they can
absolutely.
avoid some of the pitfalls that we had to go through,
Right.
and look forward to things like the gig economy, universal basic income, what's going to happen with the criminal injustice system,
Mhm.
those kinds of things. We have to figure out a way that's humanistic in approach, and yet allows people to take home pay enough pay to feed their families, to have a decent place to live, all the things that FDR talked about so long ago.
Yeah, amen. The FDR, I think that on the political side, I think that's what we have to do. We have to reclaim the Democratic Party, make it the party of Roosevelt again.
Exactly.
And the crisis we're facing in the streets right now, humanity is going to be an imperfect beast no matter what. But I'm confident, I believe firmly in my heart that a better economic system where
Exactly.
workers can look forward not only to a better future for themselves,
Yep.
but better for however they define their family, be it their kids, their nephews and nieces, the kids down the street. We're going to see a lot less despair. We're going to see a lot less, not eliminating it, but a lot less drug abuse, substance abuse, when people wake up in the morning and can look forward to a better future for themselves and their family. And the proven route for that, among others, but the historical route for that is organized labor.
Exactly.
Very true. Educating.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks again for your time, John.
Okay.
I really appreciate what you had to say.
I really appreciate putting this on. God bless you folks. Okay. Glad you're working out.
All right, John.
Thank
Nice
you.
to see you. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, guys. Well, that's it for today. And we've covered, police unions and what happens when union issues conflict with personal beliefs on the campaign trail. We want to thank Bill Fletcher Jr. and also John Andrzejczyk and all of you for watching. Tomorrow, we're going to hear why labor is involved in politics, an arbitrator's viewpoint on unions. We're going to have a local union officer who represents the members of the media, and why boycotts and strikes may or may not work. And you can continue to post your comments and questions on the Facebook page, Building Union. See you tomorrow.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thanks.